Hello, and welcome to Self-Care Sunday with the Radical Social Worker. So in this video, I'm going to be talking to you all about something that I think is very important, and that is communication boundaries. So think about your workday. When does it start? When does it end? In this day and age, it might be kind of hard to tell because we have access to communication at our fingertips 24/7. So we may often find ourselves looking at our email for work constantly, even when we're at home, just because we have that habit now of picking up our phone and looking at notifications and checking things. But what that does is it really makes it hard for us to understand when our workday ends. And so our work can trickle into our personal lives on a regular basis. So think about yourself and your workday. Think about how often you respond to communication from coworkers, from other stakeholders in your practice or in your business, to supervisors, anyone. How often do you respond to communication outside of your designated work hours? So when we respond to communication or initiate communication outside of our designated work hours, what that does is it sets the expectation that that is going to continue. So if you have a supervisor or a coworker who tends to initiate communication with you at odd hours and you're responding, that's only encouraging that behavior to continue. And if you're a person who often initiates that communication, you may be unknowingly setting the expectation for people to respond to you, especially if you are in some type of supervisory role. Because in most cases, if you have an employee that you're contacting at odd hours, they're going to feel somewhat a little bit of pressure to respond because you are their superior. So when you think about your communication, it's important to begin to process why you communicate when you do. So are you a very kind of creative and messy thinker where things come to you at odd times and you feel like if you don't communicate them right then, you're going to lose it? If that's you, which sometimes that's me, if that's you, that's the time when you can do something else. Instead of initiate that communication, you can make a list. And then at the appropriate time, right, like during regular business hours, then you can communicate that list to the appropriate people. Think about whether or not you feel that there is an expectation for you to communicate outside of business hours. Like, do you feel like your supervisor or your coworker is encouraging you to do that? Is encouraging you to have unhealthy boundaries between work and personal life? If that's the case and you feel that pressure to respond to other people who are initiating communication outside of business hours, maybe it's time to step back and think about a way that that could be appropriately addressed with that person. Does your workplace often say they promote work-life balance, but the actions don't necessarily support that claim? So for example, if your supervisor is encouraging all of you to have better boundaries with work and engage in self-care, yet your supervisor is constantly initiating contact with you at late hours or very early morning hours, there's some incongruency there. So you may want to figure out the best way to address that with your supervisor. Maybe something as simple as, hey, I'm really working hard to implement a self-care routine. Is there any way that we can avoid having communication outside of work hours unless it's absolutely necessary? Or maybe just asking for clarification, something like, when you email me early in the morning or late at night, are you expecting me to respond at that time? Or is it appropriate for me to wait and respond until the next work day? So asking those questions, because you may be assuming that there's the expectation for you to respond, but in reality, your supervisor or coworker, whoever is emailing you or texting or messaging, whatever the case may be, they may not really be expecting you to respond. They may just be in that zone where they have the thought in their head and they need to communicate it right away so they don't lose it. Probably the best way to avoid engaging in work contact outside of work hours would be to turn off your devices. Now, again, in this day and age, that may not be realistic, right? We depend on our phones, our laptops, our tablets for so many things. But maybe figuring out a way to modify your notifications, but trying to set some boundaries with yourself and your devices is very important because they can be problematic for other reasons other than just work communication. Think about when you want your leisure time to start after your workday, right? What I've noticed is with myself, with my husband, with other people in my life that I care about, if we get home and we immediately pull out our laptop, our phone, and check to see what we missed on the ride home. So it's like we go from work home and then straight to work again. And once you get back in that zone of that work communication or researching or whatever it is that you're doing, it's really hard to stop. And so you're losing out on that leisure time or family time or time to recover and recoup from your day. So it can be really important yet really challenging to set some boundaries with yourself regarding your devices and your communication for work-related issues. So think about, how often does this happen to you? When you get home and you immediately take out your computer or look at your phone to look at what communications you missed, or you start following up on things from the workday already. Do you do that? Or when you get home, are you setting aside your workday and taking in family time or leisure time, time for yourself, time with your pet, whatever the case may be? Are you allowing yourself to have time off work? Are you allowing yourself to have a personal life and time for leisure and recovery and self-care? So it's important to start asking questions to clarify. What are the expectations in your work environment? So asking your supervisor, if I receive work contact outside of my work hours, am I expected to respond to that right away? Or is it appropriate for me in your eyes to wait until my next scheduled time of work? So seeing what the response is to that. Most likely the expectation is going to be that you respond within your work hours, but we can feel that pressure of that expectation, that perceived expectation that we must respond right away, or something bad will happen, or we'll get in trouble, or whatever the case may be. So asking the question to clarify what the expectation is, because you may be giving yourself a lot of undue stress and you're not even really expected to respond. So the second thing is to start setting boundaries with yourself. Are you the person who initiates contact outside of work hours? If so, work to stop doing that. Give everyone else a break too. If you run into those times where you have those kind of brainstorming sessions, you have a lot of ideas, you feel like you need to communicate them quickly, or maybe you remember something very important from the workday that you forgot to communicate. If it's someone else's work hours and you feel that it's an emergency for you to pass on this information, then it's probably appropriate for you to do it. But if it's not really an emergency, if it's not really information that people need right then it's probably more appropriate to make a list and note who needs to be told what from your list and then communicate it at a more appropriate time. Setting those boundaries around communication with work may not be easy to do, but just remember that you're worth trying, right? Your peace of mind, your ability to have leisure time, family time, your ability to take a break from work and recover from the day, that matters and you're worth that. So even though this may be challenging to start to put your devices down, to have conversations with supervisors or coworkers about communicating outside of work hours, may not be easy to do, but it is definitely worth it, and you will probably start to feel much less stress once you begin to implement this into your life. I know different self-care strategies work for different people, but I can tell you for me personally, when I am going through a time when I'm responding to work communication a lot outside of work hours, my brain does not shut off, and it impacts my ability to sleep. But when I am putting those boundaries in place, I feel more rested and I feel more enjoyment in my personal time because I don't have work constantly on my mind. So I hope that you found this little dialogue and these couple of tips useful, and hope that you will tune in next time for our next installment of Self-Care Sundays. I hope the rest of your weekend is fantastic and that you're able to start setting those boundaries. Bye.